Captain Lee Taeho walked slowly through the massive doors of the alien council chamber. His black shoes made soft sounds on the smooth metal floor. The room was bigger than 10 football fields. Put together high above his head, the ceiling showed moving pictures of distant stars and planets. Hundreds of alien beings filled the space. Their voices created a low buzzing sound like angry Biestejo found his usual seat in the far corner of the room. It was a simple metal chair that looked old and cheap compared to the floating crystal seats and golden thrones around him. His plain black suit looked dull next to the bright robes and shining armor worn by other delegates. Some aliens glowed with their own light. Others had skin that changed colors like rainbows. A few had so many arms that Taeho lost count when he tried to watch them move. The other beings barely looked at him when he sat down. A tall blue creature with 4 eyes glanced his way, then turned back to its conversation. With a group of insect-like aliens, they spoke in their own language, but Taeho understood every word. His translator device was hidden inside his ear, where no one could see it. The blue alien was complaining about human requests for better trade. Deals it, said humans were too weak to deserve good treatment. Ho kept his face calm and empty. He had learned long ago to never show what he was really thinking. This meant he was simple, or maybe even slow. They had no idea that behind his quiet face was a mind that had been trained for war. The council meeting started when a massive alien that looked like a walking tree banged a metal stick on the floor. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. All the talking stopped, and hundreds of strange eyes turned toward the front of the room. The tree alien spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through leaves. It talked about trade routes between different star systems and mining rights on distant planets. When the topic of human requests came up, the mood in the room changed. Taeho could feel it, even though his face never moved. Several aliens made sounds that he knew were laughter. A red creature with tentacles instead of arms waved them around while making clicking noises. An alien that looked like a giant spider tapped its legs on the floor. In what Taeho recognized as amusement, the blue alien from earlier stood up on its long legs. Its voice carried clearly through the huge room when it spoke about how humans wanted representation on the Galactic Military Committee. The creature made it sound like the most ridiculous thing it had ever heard. Other aliens joined in with their own versions of laughter. Some made whistling sounds, others produced deep rumbling noises that made the floor vibrate. Taeho listened to every word while his hands rested calmly on his knees. No one looking at him would guess that those same hands had once strangled an enemy soldier in complete silence during the Mars underground wars. The scars on his knuckles were hidden under thin gloves that looked like normal dress wear. Breath for 40 minutes while hiding from patrol drones on Titan, the alien delegates continued to discuss human requests like they were dealing with children asking for candy. The spider-like creature suggested that humans should be grateful for any scraps. The council decided to give them a floating alien that looked like a jellyfish made of light, agreed that humans needed to learn their place in the galaxy. Several others nodded their various heads in agreement. What none of them knew was that Taeho had killed his first enemy when he was 16 years old. He had spent 20 years in Earth's most secret military units, the Special Operations Division that most humans never knew existed. He had fought in wars on 7 different planets and survived battles that would have broken the minds of these proud aliens, but to them, he looked like nothing more than a clerk in a cheap suit. The shifted his weight, never showed any sign of boredom or frustration. His training had taught him patience, above all else. He had once waited motionless in a sniper position for 3 days just to take one perfect shot. The memory of that mission brought the smallest hint of a smile to his lips, but it disappeared so quickly that no one noticed as the meeting continued. The aliens made their decisions about human requests. They rejected most of them outright. A few got approved, but only in ways that benefited the alien races more than humanity. When they talked about giving humans permission to build a small trading post in the outer rim systems, they made it sound like they were being incredibly generous. The blue alien stood up again and gave a long speech about how the council was being too kind to humans. It said that Earth was a small, unimportant planet and its people should be happy just to be allowed in the same room as their betters. Many aliens made approving sounds. The giant spider creature clicked its agreement. The floating jellyfish pulsed with brighter colors. Taeho absorbed every insult, every dismissive comment, every moment of alien arrogance. His memory recorded it all for future reference. He knew that Someday, these same creatures would remember this meeting very differently. They would remember the day they underestimated humanity and wonder how they could have been so blind. When the session finally ended, Tejo stood up slowly from his cheap metal chair. He smoothed down his plain black jacket and adjusted his simple tie. Then he walked toward the other delegates. His movements were careful and precise, like someone who was not used to being around important people. Several aliens stepped aside as he passed, but not out of respect. They simply wanted to avoid contact with the primitive human at the exit. Tejo turned around and bowed politely to the assembled aliens. The right amount of respect for beings who considered themselves his superiors. Most of the aliens ignored his gesture completely. A few nodded back in the way that powerful people acknowledge servants as Tejo walked through the corridors leading back to his quarters. He passed groups of alien soldiers. The hallways were wide enough for the largest species to move comfortably. Tejo looked small and insignificant next to the armored warriors who guarded the station. His soft footsteps were barely audible compared to the heavy clanking of their metal boots and the electronic humming of their energy weapons. The aliens he passed saw exactly what they expected to see: a quiet human in a plain suit who looked lost and out of place. Among the great powers of the galaxy, none of them noticed the way his eyes cataloged every weapon, every weak point in their armor, every pattern in their patrol routes. His training made such observation as natural as breathing in his small quarters. That night, Tejo finally allowed himself to relax. He removed his jacket and hung it carefully in the narrow closet. The simple room had a bed, a desk, and a small window that looked out into space. It was much smaller than the luxurious suites given to important alien delegates, but Tejo had slept in much worse places. He rolled up his sleeves and revealed arms covered in old scars. Each mark told a story of survival and victory in battles that these aliens could never imagine. Some scars came from knife fights in the tunnels under Mars City. Others were souvenirs from the plasma burns he received during the Titan Rebellion. The largest scar ran from his wrist to his elbow, where a Centauri raider had tried to cut his throat and activated a communication device hidden in his desk. The technology was far more advanced than anything the aliens suspected humans possessed. He spoke quietly into the device, using codes that would mean nothing to anyone listening. His voice was calm and professional as he gave his report about the council meeting. He told his commanders on Earth about the alien attitudes and their decisions regarding human requests. He described the security arrangements on the station and the types of weapons carried by the guards. His report was thorough and detailed, covering everything from alien psychology to tactical weaknesses and their defenses. When he finished his report, Tejo looked out his small window at the stars. The alien patrols moved in predictable patterns around the station. Their ships were large and impressive, but they followed routes that any competent strategist could exploit. The aliens felt safe and superior in their mighty fortress. They had no idea that death was already inside their walls, wearing a simple black suit and speaking softly as he prepared for sleep. Tejo allowed himself one small smile. The aliens thought they knew humans, but they had only seen what humanity wanted them to see. Tomorrow there would be another council meeting, with more insults and more dismissals. But somewhere in the darkness between the stars, human ships were moving into position. The galaxy was about to learn that appearances could be very, very deceiving. 3 days passed peacefully on Nexus Prime Station. The alien delegates continued their meetings about trade and territory while Tejo sat quietly in his corner chair. The morning of the 4th day started like any other, with hundreds of different species gathering in the Great Council Chamber. But something was different in the air. The usual confident chatter seemed more nervous, and several alien military officers kept checking their communication devices. Admiral Park Soman was the first to notice the strange readings on her sensors. The tall Valkyrie woman with blue skin and silver eyes had commanded the station defense fleet for over 20 years. Her experience told her that something was very wrong. The objects approaching from deep space moved in perfect formation, like no natural phenomenon she had ever seen. Burst through the doors with her silver uniform, gleaming under the chamber lights. Her 4 arms gestured wildly as she tried to get the attention of the council leader. Great Hall Admiral Soman activated the main display screen that covered most of one wall. The formation was too perfect to be a natural event and too large to be a normal fleet. The readings made even the most advanced alien technology looked primitive. The council chamber erupted in confused voices as hundreds of delegates tried to understand what they were seeing. Some aliens made high-pitched whistling sounds when they were afraid. Others produced deep growling noises. The floating jellyfish creatures turned pale colors, while the insect-like beings clicked their mandibles rapidly in distress. The Trialian council leader used its booming voice to restore order, then asked. Long-range scanners had picked up a massive fleet approaching from the void between galaxies. The ships were enormous, far larger than anything in the known database. More details came flooding in from observation posts. Throughout the system, the approaching vessels were black as space itself and covered in strange symbols that hurt to look at directly. They moved without any detectable propulsion system and ignored all attempts at communication. Several smaller scout ships had been sent to investigate, but they simply vanished when they got to Clozan Old. Passed down through thousands of generations, told of ships like these, the creatures who sailed in them were called as myths created by primitive civilizations to explain natural disasters, but now as they watched the perfect formation of black ships approaching their station, leaving nothing behind but empty space where planets once orbited, they suddenly hugged each other in terror. Species that had never shown fear began to shake and cry. Representatives who usually demanded respect for their ancient cultures, looking for someone to hide behind. The proud blue Valkyrie, who had laughed at human weakness, now had skin so pale it was almost white. The floating jellyfish creatures pulsed with colors that meant extreme distress in their species through all this chaos. Tejo remained perfectly still in his corner seat. His face showed no emotion, even as alien beings, much larger than him, cowered in fear around the chamber. His dark eyes watched everything, but his expression never changed. He looked like a man observing an interesting but distant event rather than someone facing possible death. The council leader called for emergency sessions to discuss defense plans. The combined fleets of all member species totaled nearly 800 ships, including some of the most advanced warships ever built, but intelligence reports suggested that the approaching had spent centuries fighting each other, now tried to work together. Some suggested evacuating the station and fleeing to distant parts of the galaxy. Others wanted to send diplomatic missions to negotiate with the Devourers. A few brave voices called for making a final stand to protect the 50 million civilians living on Nexus Prime. The debate went on for hours, with no clear solution. Every plan seemed hopeless against an enemy that legends said could destroy stars themselves. The alien delegates grew more panicked as time passed and the black ships drew closer. Several species began openly weeping, while others raged at their military leaders for not being prepared finally. One of the Valkyrie admirals suggested asking Earth for help. The suggestion was met with bitter laughter from several delegates, the same aliens who had dismissed human requests for fair treatment. Leader looked toward Tejo Corner, where the humans sat quietly watching the proceedings. Earth could provide any ships or weapons to help defend against. The approaching Threadaho stood up slowly from his uncomfortable metal chair. His movement was smooth and controlled, unlike the frantic gestures of the aliens around him. He walked toward the center of the chamber with measured steps that echoed. In the sudden silence, his plain black suit looked even more ordinary next to the elaborate robes and armor worn by other delegates when he reached the main floor. Tejo looked up at the massive display screen showing the approaching Devourer fleet. His voice was soft and polite when he asked about the details of the threat. He wanted to know exactly how many ships were coming and how long until they arrived. Told him about the 200 massive dreadnoughts that could destroy planets and the strange weapons that bent space itself. The fleet would reach Nexus Prime in less than 6 hours, based on their current speed. Tejo nodded thoughtfully as he absorbed the information. Then he asked about the civilian population on the station and the defense capabilities of the combined alien fleets. His questions were precise and professional, like someone gathering intelligence for a military operation. Aliens answered eagerly, thinking that the human was preparing to offer Earth assistance in the coming battle. To give Earth valuable mining rights and trade concessions in exchange for military support. Was thinking or planning. The aliens hung on his every word, hoping for some sign that Earth would come to their rescue finally. Before he could give them an answer, the hope in alien eyes was almost pathetic as they watched the human who they had dismissed and insulted. Just days before, as Tejo walked back toward the chamber exit, the aliens watched him with desperate attention. Their mighty civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for millennia now depended on the goodwill of the species they had considered weak and primitive. The irony would have been funny if their situation was not so desperate in the corridor outside. The chamber Taeho allowed himself a small smile. The aliens still had no idea what they were really dealing with. They had been about humanity. The black ships continued their approach through space while Taeho walked calmly toward his quarters. His mind was already working on plans and calculations that would have impressed the best alien strategists. The galaxy was about to see what humans were really capable of when someone threatened their friends. Taeho walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime with the same calm steps he always used, but something had changed in his eyes. Step back when they saw him approaching his destination was his small quarters where he kept equipment that no one else knew existed inside. The communication device he pulled out looked nothing like the simple equipment the aliens thought humans possessed. So advanced that even the most sophisticated alien computers could not break its codes. He activated the device and spoke into it, using words that would sound like random noise to anyone listening. His voice was different now, carrying the authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in deadly battles. The response came immediately from locations scattered across the galaxy to another hidden compartment that contained clothing he had never worn in front of the aliens. The black tactical armor that emerged looked like it belonged in a nightmare. Sensors and targeting systems were built into every piece. The weapons that came with it appeared to be alien technology, but performed far beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen as. He changed from his simple, a human warrior. Taeho felt the familiar weight of his true identity settling around him. The mild-mannered ambassador who sat quietly in council meetings was just a mask he wore. The real Lee Taeho was something that had been forged in the fires of a dozen wars and tempered by battles that would have broken stronger men. When he looked in the mirror, the transformation was complete. The man staring back at him was no longer someone who could be dismissed or ignored. This was a predator that had learned to hunt things much larger and more dangerous than himself. The alien delegates who had laughed at human weakness were about to meet something from their worst nightmare. Homemade his way back to the council chamber, where panic had reached new heights. The approaching Devourer fleet was now visible on long-range sensors, and the sight of those massive black ships had driven for being unprepared. When the chamber doors opened and Taeho entered wearing his battle armor, the entire room fell silent. Hundreds of alien eyes stared at the human who no longer looked like prey. The weapons hanging from his belt radiated energy, signatures that made nearby aliens feel sick. The helmet he wore projected targeting information that would have made their best military computers seem like toys. A council leader was the first to find his voice, asking Taeho about the dramatic change in his appearance. The tree-like being had ruled the galaxy for over a century, but now sounded like a frightened child when faced with this new version of the human. Delegate Tatho spoke through his helmet speakers, and his voice carried electronic filters that made it sound inhuman and terrifying. He told the assembled aliens that Earth did not have any ships to spare for the defense of Nexus Prime. The despair that filled the chamber was almost physical as hundreds of civilizations realized they were truly alone. But then Taeho activated a holographic display that showed the space around the station. Them invisible to alien sensors, the vessels that uncloaked were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Off the scales of alien measuring devices, the ships were smaller than traditional alien dreadnoughts, but the power they contained was beyond. At the display, in shock and growing terror, they had spent decades dismissing humans as weak and primitive. The readings from just one human ship exceeded the combined firepower of most alien battle groups. Taeho explained in his cold electronic voice that humans had been watching and waiting for a very long time. They had observed alien politics and military capabilities while hiding their own true strength. The species that thought they ruled the galaxy had been nothing more than children playing with toys, while real warriors watched from the shadows. A Valkyrie admiral pointed at the display with a shaking finger, asking how such power was possible. The energy output from the human ships was beyond anything their scientists thought could exist. Taeho's response was simple and terrifying. Humans did not build weapons for show, they built them to kill. The communication system in Taeho's helmet crackled to life as reports came in from his fleet commanders. The human ships had surrounded the Devourer fleet and were requesting permission to engage. The voices of his captains carried the same cold professionalism that marked elite soldiers preparing for battle. Tejo looked around the chamber at all the aliens who had spent years them if they wanted to see what humans could really do in a fight. The response from his fleet was immediate and eager. In their voices was the sound of predators being released to hunt the galaxy, was about to witness something it had never seen before. Why Earth children did not fear the dark. The transmission that went out to his fleet carried authorization codes that activated weapon systems the galaxy did not know. Died, and a new age began. The aliens in the council chamber watched their sensors as human ships moved to intercept the Devourer fleet. The readings they saw made no sense, according to everything they thought they knew about physics and warfare. The human vessels accelerated to impossible speeds and began maneuvering in ways that should have torn them apart. The weapons signatures they produced were unlike anything in any database. The aliens realized they were about to witness a battle between forces far beyond their understanding. In the corner of the chamber where Tejo used to sit quietly, a few alien delegates noticed something they had missed before. There were scuff marks on the metal floor from years of his boots and scratches. On the wall where his chair had rested, those marks now seemed like evidence of a predator that had been watching and planning while they thought dominance was ending, and something new and terrible was about to take its place. The humans had finally decided to stop pretending to be weak, and the universe was not prepared for what they really were. The battle began in a way that destroyed everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. The massive Devourer fleet approached Nexus Prime in their traditional formation, expecting to overwhelm the station with superior numbers and firepower. Their black ships were the size of small moons and carried weapons that could crack planets in half. The alien defense fleet spread out in standard battle formation with their largest ships in front and smaller vessels providing support their commanders. Followed tactics that had been used for thousands of years in galactic conflicts. They prepared to die bravely while buying time for civilians too. Escape then, the human ships moved, and the universe changed forever. Commander Kim Minseok led Death Squadron through the Devourer ranks like a pack of wolves attacking sheep, his ship's soul. Revenge was barely a tenth the size of the enemy dreadnoughts, but when it opened fire, the results were beyond imagination. The human weapons did not just destroy their targets, they erased them from existence. The alien observers in the council chamber watched their sensor displays with growing amazement and terror. Human vessels moved with impossible speed, dodging attacks that should have vaporized them. The energy beams from Devourer ships passed harmlessly through space, where human vessels had been milliseconds before. What shocked the aliens most was how the human ships fought. They did not maintain formation like civilized species or follow any recognizable battle doctrine. Instead, they hunted each ship, choosing its own targets and attacking with a savagery that belonged in nightmares. Lieutenant Choi Hai-jin piloted her fighter through a formation of Devourer cruisers, her ship twisting and spinning in patterns that should have been impossible. The alien physicists watching calculated that the forces acting on her vessel should have turned both ship and pilot into paste. But somehow she not only survived, but struck back with weapons that cut through enemy armor like knives through paper. The Valkyrie admiral commanding the alien defense fleet watched in stunned silence as a single human ship engaged 3 Devourer dreadnoughts. Simultaneously, the human vessel was so small compared to its enemies that it looked like an insect fighting elephants. But when the battle was over, all 3 enemy ships were dead, and the human fighter was already hunting. New Pre-Admiral Park Somin tried to understand what she was seeing on her tactical displays. The human ships moved in ways that violated every law of physics she knew. Their weapons produced energy signatures that her instruments could not properly measure. When she asked her science officers to explain what was happening, they could only shake their heads in bewilderment. The Devourer fleet that had approached with such confidence began to fall apart as human hunters struck from impossible angles. Ships that had destroyed civilizations found themselves helpless against enemies they could barely see. The perfect formation that had struck fear into galactic hearts scattered as captains tried desperately to escape the nightmare that surrounded them. In the council chamber, Tejo watched the battle displays with satisfaction. His helmet showed him targeting information from every human ship in the engagement. He could see through the eyes of his pilots as they selected targets and executed maneuvers that would be impossible for alien minds to comprehend. The council leader found the courage to ask how this was possible. The tree-like being had witnessed thousands of space battles, but nothing like what he was seeing now. Human ships appeared and disappeared, like ghosts striking without warning and vanishing. Before return fire could touch them, Tejo explained in his cold electronic voice that the aliens had made a fundamental error in their assumptions about humanity. They thought humans were weak because they had never seen humans fight seriously. Every conflict they had observed was between human factions using weapons designed to capture territory, not to completely destroy enemies. Real human military had been built for a different purpose entirely. It was designed to hunt and kill. Things that were bigger, stronger, and more advanced than humanity. The weapons and tactics that seemed impossible to alien minds were the natural result of a species that had spent millions of years learning to kill predators much larger than themselves. Captain Park Sang-woo led his squadron in a maneuver that made the alien observers gasp in disbelief. His 5 ships surrounded a Devourer command vessel that was protected by dozens of escort ships. The human formation moved like dancers performing a deadly ballet. Each ship knew exactly where the others would be, and when they would be there. The attack that followed lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, the massive enemy command ship and all its escorts had been reduced to expanding clouds of glowing gas. The human ships emerged from the destruction without a scratch and immediately began hunting new targets. What terrified the aliens most was the casual efficiency of the human attacks. Risks taken. Each strike was calculated to achieve maximum destruction with minimum effort. The human pilots fought like they had done this 1,000 times before. The communication channels between human ships carried voices that sounded almost bored. As they coordinated their attacks, they discussed targeting priorities and tactical adjustments with the same tone that others might use to talk about the weather. The most terrifying battle the galaxy had ever seen was just another day at work for human warriors. A group of Devourer ships tried to break away from the main battle and flee toward deep space. They had seen enough to know they were facing something beyond their ability to fight, but Captain Yoon Da-yoon intercepted them. With her heavy cruiser Busan Thunder, the fleeing ships opened fire with every weapon they possessed, turning space into a hellstorm of energy beams and explosive projectiles. The human ship flew straight through the barrage as if the weapons firing at it were harmless light shows. When she returned fire, 3 enemy ships simply ceased to exist. Aliens watching the battle began to understand something that chilled them to their cores. The humans were not fighting desperately to save the station. They were not even fighting at full capacity. This was just a demonstration, a casual display of power to make a point. The real question was not whether humans could win, but how long they would choose to let the battle continue. Oho received a report that made him smile. Behind his helmet, one of his captains had disabled a Devourer ship without destroying it. The crew was alive, and their communication systems were intact. This would serve his purposes perfectly. He opened a channel to the surviving enemy vessel and spoke in the same calm voice he had used in diplomatic meetings. His words were polite and professional as he offered the Devourer captain a choice. The ship could be destroyed immediately, or it could carry a message back to whoever had sent the fleet. The message was simple and terrifying. Humans had been watching the galaxy for a very long time. They remembered every insult, every dismissal, every moment they had been treated as inferior. The species that thought they ruled space had been living on borrowed time, and now the bill had come due. The surviving Devourer ship fled toward deep space, carrying news that would change the balance of power throughout the universe. Behind it, the wreckage of the most feared fleet in galactic history drifted in expanding clouds of debris. The battle that was supposed to destroy Nexus Prime had lasted less than an hour. In the council chamber, hundreds of alien delegates sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. The species they had dismissed as primitive had just demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded their worst nightmares. The galaxy had new masters, and they wore simple black suits while speaking in soft voices. The days following the battle brought changes that swept through the galaxy like wildfire. The alien species that had once dominated galactic politics now moved carefully around their human neighbors. Every word spoken in council meetings was measured And respectful, the laughter and dismissive comments about human requests became distant memories, replaced by nervous politeness. Toho returned to his simple diplomatic clothing, but the change in how others treated him was dramatic. The same metal chair in the corner of the council chamber now seemed like a throne. The aliens who had ignored him for years now hung on his every word. When he spoke, even the most powerful delegates took careful notes. The Valkyrie ambassador, who had once mocked human trade proposals, now offered Earth's exclusive mining rights to 3 entire star systems. The terms were so generous that they would have been unthinkable just days before. The blue-skinned alien leader spoke with shaking hands as she presented the offer. Her 4 eyes never quite meeting Taeho gaze. Captain Yoon Do-yoon arrived from Earth to serve as military liaison, and her presence sent new waves of fear through the alien community. Unlike Taeho's diplomatic approach, she made no effort to hide her dangerous nature. She wore her uniform with pride and carried weapons openly. Her cold eyes promised violence to anyone who tested human patience. The alien guards who patrolled the station corridors now stepped aside when they saw her approaching. Some actually pressed themselves against the walls to avoid any possibility of accidentally blocking her path. The same warriors who had once looked down on humans now treated a single human woman like a force of nature. When Da-yoon requested permission to establish permanent human patrol routes through council space, the assembled delegates approved unanimously. No one dared to ask what would happen if they refused. The memory of the Devourer fleet destruction was still fresh in everyone's memory, but not all alien species accepted the new reality. Gracefully secret meetings began in hidden locations throughout the galaxy. Species that had never cooperated before started sharing intelligence and planning resistance. Some believed that human power was based on tricks and deception that could be countered with proper preparation. The Valkyrie military command met in a shielded facility deep underground on their homeworld. Admiral Kesvarain outlined a plan for what she called a preemptive strike against key human positions. The idea was to hit hard and fast before humans could deploy their mysterious weapons. Similar meetings took place on dozens of worlds as alien leaders convinced themselves that human dominance was temporary. The Threx War Council debated whether to form an alliance with the surviving Devourer forces. The floating Medusae discussed using their psionic abilities to disrupt human communications. What none of them realized was that humans had been monitoring their secret communications for decades. The quantum encryption systems that aliens thought were unbreakable were like open books to human intelligence services. Every secret meeting, every hidden plan, every whispered conspiracy was recorded, and Annalisa Daho received detailed reports about the alien resistance movements while sitting in his small quarters, reading them with the same calm expression he wore during council meetings. The species that thought they were planning in secret had no idea that their most private conversations were being broadcast directly to human command centers. He forwarded the most interesting intelligence to his fleet commanders, along with authorization to take appropriate action. The response was swift and surgical. 3 days later, the Valkyrie home fleet suffered a series of equipment malfunctions that left every ship defenseless. The alien warships did not explode or burn. Instead, their weapons simply stopped working. Their shields failed, their engines went offline, and their communication systems began broadcasting embarrassing personal messages from crew members. The mighty Valkyrie Navy was reduced to helpless metal floating in space. Similar incidents happened throughout the galaxy. Species that had been planning resistance found their military capabilities mysteriously degraded. Ships that tried to approach human positions lost power and drifted helplessly. Computer systems that stored sensitive data began broadcasting their contents to anyone who cared to listen to them. Message was clear and unmistakable. Humans could destroy their enemies whenever they chose, but they preferred to humiliate them instead. The psychological impact was devastating. Alien military leaders, who had commanded respect for centuries, now looked like incompetent fools. The conspiracy movements collapsed before they could begin. Word spread through alien intelligence networks that opposing humanity was not just dangerous, it was impossible. The species that had once plotted in secret now competed to offer better terms to their new human masters. Trade agreements that had taken years to negotiate were rewritten in days to favor human interests. Had been controlled by alien cartels open to human commerce. Military bases that had been forbidden to outsiders now welcomed human inspectors. Captain Lee Minho arrived to establish the new Human Trade Authority on Nexus Prime. His office was larger than the quarters given to most alien ambassadors and equipped with technology that made the station's existing systems look primitive. When he spoke about trade policy, the alien merchants listened with desperate attention. The psychological transformation of the alien leadership was remarkable to observe. Species that had ruled the galaxy for millennia now behaved like children. Seeking approval from human authorities, the proud Valkyrie, who had dismissed human weakness, now sent gifts and tribute to Earth. Some alien philosophers tried to understand what had happened to their civilizations. They debated whether humans had been planning galactic domination from the beginning, or if they had simply adapted faster than anyone expected. The truth was probably both, but no one dared to ask human leaders. Directly, Tejo maintained his polite diplomatic facade throughout the transition. He attended trade negotiations, participated in security briefings, and spoke softly to alien delegates, who hung on his every word. The mild-mannered ambassador in the simple black suit had become the most feared person in the galaxy. When younger aliens asked their elders how this had happened, the answers were always the same. They had mistaken human restraint for weakness and human patience for inability. The species that had evolved as persistence hunters had simply been waiting for the right moment to remind the galaxy who they really were. The old power structures that had dominated space for thousands of years crumbled in weeks. New hierarchies emerged, with humans at the top and alien species arranged below them, according to how quickly they adapted to the new reality. Those who accepted human authority prospered, while those who resisted found themselves isolated and powerless. Late at night, when the station was quiet and the political games had paused, Tejo would stand at his window and watch human ships patrol the perimeter. Their crews were no longer hiding their troop capabilities. The sleek black vessels moved through space like predators marking their territory. The galaxy had new rulers, and they had taken power not through conquest but through revelation. The aliens had defeated themselves by underestimating an enemy that had been watching and planning for decades. The age of human dominance had begun with a quiet man in a simple suit, who had taught the universe that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one no one sees coming. 6 months after the battle at Nexus Prime, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. Human ships patrolled trade routes that were once battlegrounds between competing alien species. Pirates and raiders, who had terrorized merchant vessels for generations, simply vanished when they encountered human patrols. Their ships were found drifting empty in space, with no trace of what had happened to their crews. The council chamber, where Tejo had once sat ignored, now centered every major decision around human input. When he spoke, the most powerful alien leaders in the galaxy took notes and asked for clarification. When he remained silent, they worried about what his silence meant and tried to guess what would please him. The transformation was not just political, but psychological. The alien species that had ruled space for millennia discovered that their confidence had been built on the illusion of superiority. Finding out that humans had been watching and judging them from the shadows shattered their sense of natural dominance. New alien recruits to the galactic military now trained under human instructors, who taught them that survival meant adapting to change rather than clinging to tradition. The old ways of warfare that had seemed so sophisticated were revealed to be clumsy and predictable. When faced with human tactics, young aliens studied human history in their schools and learned about a species that had conquered their own planet. By outsmarting predators much larger and stronger than themselves, the stories of human persistence and ingenuity became required reading for anyone who wanted to understand the new galactic order. Ambassador Song Yu-jin arrived from Earth to establish the human colonial authority, and her presence announced that the time for subtle diplomacy was over. Unlike Tejo's quiet approach, she embodied humanity, open dominance. Her headquarters on Nexus Prime rivaled the council building in size and surpassed it in technological sophistication. Building itself was a statement of human power. Its black walls seemed to absorb light, while its communication arrays reached into dimensions that alien science barely understood. The interior was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Every alien who entered left with a clear understanding of their place. In the new hierarchy, first address to the galactic media was broadcast to every inhabited world in known space. Her words were polite, but carried an underlying threat that no one could miss. She explained that humanity offered partnership to species wise enough to accept it, and conquest to those foolish enough to resist. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Alien governments that had been slow to acknowledge human authority suddenly competed to offer better terms. Trade delegations arrived daily at human facilities, bearing gifts and promises of cooperation. Military alliances that had existed for centuries dissolved as former partners rushed to align themselves with Earthsome alien species, adapted quickly to the new reality. The Nexari, who had always been merchants by nature, embraced human trade policies and found their profits increasing dramatically. The Keth, who prized technological advancement, eagerly studied human science and engineering. The survivors prospered under human guidance. Others struggled to accept their reduced status. The proud Velkari, who had once led the galactic military, found themselves reduced to providing security for human shipping lanes. The ancient Medusi, who had believed themselves to be the galaxy's most advanced species, discovered that their psionic abilities were useless. Against human mental shielding, a few species chose resistance and learned why. That was a mistake. The Draconis Imperium, that had controlled the Outer Rim for 2,000 years, declared that they would never bow to human authority. Their home fleet simply vanished one night, leaving no trace except empty space where their ships had been. The hegemony of worlds that had always prided itself on military might attempted to blockade human trade routes. Their blockade ships were found the next day, converted into art installations that spelled out messages of human superiority in languages that could be read from orbit. The Devourers never returned to threaten the galaxy again. Rumors circulated about human diplomatic missions that had visited their home territories, but the details were never confirmed. What was certain was that the ancient enemy that had once inspired terror across the galaxy was no longer a threatsome. Alien philosophers debated whether humanity had planned this domination from the beginning. They pointed to the careful way humans had positioned themselves throughout galactic society, always present but never prominent, always watching but never interfering until the perfect moment arrived. Argued that humans had simply adapted faster than anyone expected when faced with a galaxy that underestimated them. They had used that advantage to build power while remaining invisible. The truth was probably both, but no alien dared to ask human leaders for confirmation. The old council chamber was renovated to reflect the new reality. Tejo corner seat was replaced with a platform that elevated him above the other delegates. The simple metal chair became a throne of black material that seemed to bend light around it. When he sat there, the other council members looked up at him like subjects before a king. The change in alien behavior was remarkable to observe. Species that had spent centuries confident in their natural superiority now moved carefully around their human neighbors. Every interaction was calculated to avoid giving offense. Every decision was made with consideration for human interests. Kim Minseok, who had led the attack on the Devourer fleet, was promoted to admiral and given command of the new Galactic Defense Force. The irony was not lost on anyone that the same aliens who had once mocked human military capabilities now depended on human protection. The patrol routes that human ships followed were designed to remind everyone of the new reality. Every major trade hub, every important culinary seat of alien government was regularly visited by human vessels. Their crews were professional and polite, but their presence was a constant reminder of who really controlled the Galaxian. Quiet moments when the political theater paused and the diplomatic games were set aside. Tejo would remove his formal mask and stand at the observation deck watching the stars. His reflection in the transparent aluminum showed a man who had achieved everything he had been sent to accomplish. Galaxy had new apex predators, and they ruled not through brutality, but through the careful application of overwhelming superiority. The old order based on tradition and assumed natural hierarchy had been replaced by something far more dangerous. A meritocracy where humans held all the merit. The alien species that had once laughed at human requests now competed for human approval. Those who adapted quickly found themselves in positions of privilege under the new system. Those who clung to the old ways found themselves increasingly irrelevant in a galaxy that no longer cared about their ancient pretha. Transformation was complete, but it had been achieved through revelation rather than conquest. The humans had not taken the galaxy. By force, they had simply stopped pretending to be weak. The universe had defeated itself by underestimating an enemy that had been planning and preparing for decades. As Tahoe prepared for another day of meetings where alien leaders would ask for his guidance and beg for his approval, he reflected on how far they had all come. The quiet observer in the corner chair had become the most powerful person in the galaxy, and he had done it by teaching everyone else that appearances could be very deceiving. The age of human supremacy stretched ahead, promising a future where the galaxy would be shaped by the species that had learned to hunt in the dark and strike without warning. The stars themselves seemed to acknowledge the new reality, as human ships moved between them like predators patrolling territory that had always been theirs.